Serious, people of Reddit who believe they have witnessed extraterrestrial events. What is your story? Desert camping, watching the stars. Notice one is moving. Thinking, it's too fast for a satellite. Too high up for aircraft. Wonder what it is? So I watch it cross about 3/4 of the sky and then it slows, makes a 90-degree turn, accelerates and then disappears. This was back in the 1960 to 1970 times. Still can't imagine it as anything but a UFO. When I was younger, my family would go up to Lake Ontario to spend weekends at my family's cottage. One night when I was 8 or 9, my dad, sister, probably 12-13 years old, and I were on the beach doing the campfire thing. We look out over the water and see a few relatively bright lights on the horizon. Now it is usual to see freights out that far, or even see the lights of Toronto, but this was definitely different. Different enough for my dad to run inside and grab the binoculars. Understand, he had been going to this cottage since he was a child, so if it had happened before he would have seen it. There we are next to our fire, passing the binoculars around, watching these orbs seemingly float fairly close to the water. Now, as far as I remember, we were pretty set on just calling these lights from a boat. That is until the orbs began shooting beams of light into the water. At this point my dad says something nonchalantly and along the lines of, "Oh, they're UFOs." We kept watching the light show. They would disappear and reappear and shoot their beams until they eventually just disappeared for good. I'm pretty sure that I was more excited about it potentially being something otherworldly than anything else at the time, but I guarantee when it was time for bed I was worried about being abducted. I recently asked my sister about the experience. She, like my dad, nonchalantly referred to it as the UFOs but didn't have any logical excuse for them. I am very skeptical of this stuff and stories I hear, so I'm still searching real life answers. When I was about 13 I believed extraterrestrial beings were following me around. I used to have sudden urges to go outside in the middle of the night and look up at the stars. Often I would see triangular shaped aircraft hovering over me then disappear. The house I lived in seemed to be haunted because I heard voices and saw non-human shaped shadows through the corner of my eye. The creepiest part was when I would go places an owl would follow me around. Everywhere I went the same owl would be within my surroundings. The owl would also let me get close to it, but it was always a few feet too high for me to actually touch it. This lasted about 6 months. One night I was in bed and fully awake and scared because I felt like I was surrounded by a group of people. They were speaking in whispers and I couldn't make out what they were saying. Then I remember being lifted and thrown on my bed all in state of panic, only to find my dad with his gun drawn in the doorway. He said that he heard noises and when he opened my bedroom door I was floating, so he ran and grabbed his gun. After that episode the owl, the aircraft, the shadows, and the feeling of being watched just vanished. About a year later the movie The Fourth Kind came out, which was really weird. And the creepiest comment of this thread goes to, "I think I've told this story before, but frick it, let's do this dance again. Brother and I are driving around one night to get snacks for a night of doing whatever. We decide to cut through this tiny road that runs along a park because it's quicker. About halfway down the street, my car starts to freak out. Like the radio was all way chicker and my lights kept blinking. I stop the car and all the lights shut off. So, I'm like, frick, I'll call dad, and whip out my phone. As I'm halfway through finding him in the contacts, my brother just loses it. He slaps the dash and was like, what the frick are those, and points ahead to a street lamp. Okay, I'll try to describe them the best I can. They had to be about 3 feet tall, almost a bulb-shaped body, with lanky limbs that seemed to curve instead of bend at the middle. All 4 of these things didn't have any sort of distinct head, just cat-like reflective eyes slapped near the top of their form. They crossed the road with a dreamy, bowed walk. It was freaking trippy. My brother is losing his mind and I'm trying to figure out what to do next. This all happened for about 2 minutes. Eventually, the creatures made it to the side of the road and all is quiet. We are holding our breath waiting to be shot with lasers or something when a flicker of light comes from the thick of the park and suddenly my car is alive again. We gunned it out of there really quickly. I'm not sure what to think about this, but my friend who was in the car thinks it was aliens. My friend and I were driving north from Kenosha to his house about a half hour away. We had messed up the on-ramp before, so we double checked that we were going the right way with my GPS. After a while I notice a car has been tailgating me. I quickly match the headlight pattern with that of an officer of the law, but my cruise control is set at the speed limit with none over. After being nervous about the cop for about 5 minutes of following, he very suddenly changed lanes to our left and blasted past us to tailgate someone else a few car lengths ahead. A cop freaked us out, but we were almost to our off-ramp, so we were looking for the sign, and then I see it, "Welcome to Illinois." We didn't make any turns. We stayed on the freeway, and the section we were driving on didn't have any splits. There was absolutely no turning around. We were going north, man. But the freakiest part was, I pulled over and started doing some Google Maps calculations. From the place we left Kenosha, it took a half-hour driving south to get to the Illinois border, and we had started off going farther away, not to mention we never turned. It had only been 20 minutes. The landmarks we had passed going north were also more than 20 minutes away. In the time that had passed, we shouldn't have been able to see the landmarks or to drive to Illinois, even if we would have started off going south. My friend who was with me thinks alien abduction. They picked us up and either wanted different humans for some reason, or they have some form of time travel. When they put us back, they put us on the correct freeway, but in the wrong location facing the wrong direction. Or perhaps they placed us in an alternative timeline. Or maybe we died and went back to a glitchy checkpoint. Either way, after we calmed down from our brains melting over something bizarro happening, the exact same thing happened with that same cop. We had turned around and headed back north, got entailed for a few minutes, and then they suddenly changed lanes to the left and blasted the accelerator to get up on someone else's bumper. Aliens? Improbable travel through both time and space? Reality checkpoints? I don't have any other way to explain it. Something impossible happened to us. If I'm an alien, and I accidentally pick up couple Wisconsinites, I throw 'em back too. I was a preteen and alone at my house. My town is close to a very shady neighborhood and it is frequent to hear police alarms. I've been living there my whole life at the time, and I heard this loudest noise, and a bluish light outside was about 50-60 feet away from the ground and from my house. My parents came home an hour later finding me under my bed scared to death, and they thought I was crazy because I was alone by myself and that they didn't hear or see anything when they were coming home. It was 2007, in Iraq, near Najaf Fob Kulsu Iskandariya somewhere, in the middle of the night. I was a gunner for a supply convoy, and at one point noticed something flying silently above me. I saw what can best be described as a flying manta ray. It flapped its wings a few times, and soared overhead, and out of my field of view. It was hard to guess how large it was, as it was pretty dark, and it was hard to see in the first place, but I would guess a 5-10 foot wingspan. I was wide awake and fairly well rested at the time, and never saw anything remotely like that before or since. I still assume it was a hallucination, or some sort of test UAV of some kind, but it seems like an awful design if it were a UAV. No one else saw anything weird. That just sounds trippy as heck. I hardly tell this story as I pretty much get laughed at all the time, but here it goes. I'm in high school sitting at my desk playing Unreal Tournament one night. At the time my desk was against a window so I could see outside my window just by glancing up. I decide to take a break from fragging to check the our community forums to see what's happening. While I'm checking, something catches my eye through the window and I see 3 lights in the form of triangle flying very low and very slow moving towards the back of my house. I, being stupid, decide to run to the backyard and see what it is. Sure enough, 3 lights, triangle, flying low, flying slow, and making 0 sound. I stand outside in pure awe, and about 10-15 seconds, it flies away towards the stars, and in about half a second it's just gone. Imagine the Millennium Falcon going light speed in a movie, and that's about how fast it seemed like it was going. It made no sound in that process. Never saw anything like it again. Keep in mind that at that time, I was living in featuring Hood Killeen, TX. Same thing about 10 miles south of Des Moines, directly above the sunroof of my car. Looked like windows on the bottom of it and lasted about 30 seconds, then flew away at what seemed like the speed of light. Went hiking with the Boy Scouts in Ohio when I was 14. 4 of us got ahead of the group and made it back to the parking lot first. We're talking by the car, waiting for the adults when one of us notices something above the tree line. We watched a red-orange sphere hover above the trees, maybe 2 miles out, for maybe 8-10 minutes. It seamlessly changed shapes between a red-orange sphere and a green oblong sphere. After a few minutes of watching it, it slowly began to hover towards and eventually descended behind some hills in the distance. We were excited, but then were really freaked out when 6 military attack helicopters came tearing over our heads and followed it behind the hills. I wish I could make this crap up. When the rest of the group showed up, no one believed us. The only older guy, 17, who was with us and witnessed the event told us not to talk about it because it made us sound crazy. TLDR. Hiking with Boy Scouts, saw objects change shape and color, floated behind mountains and followed by military helicopters. Lesson learned, always bring your camera on hikes. Sounds like Close Encounters. I got one. I live in far northern Cali, a pretty rural area. I had a friend over one evening and he left just after dark. About a minute after he left he calls me and says go outside. Go outside in a very calm but demanding voice. Just the tone of his voice creeped me out. I reply with what? What, but he doesn't answer. So I get up and walk out the front door. I'm looking around the street and see nothing, so I tell him I'm outside. He tells me to look up and I immediately saw it. It was a very bright light hovering really low. I immediately yell what the frick is that and he doesn't say a word. I yell to my wife very loudly to come outside and she saw it immediately. Totally speechless. We watched for about a minute as it slowly moved up and to the right. I even ran inside, grabbed my Contra helmet cam and attempted to film. I was so flustered I totally failed, forgetting to turn it on before I pressed record. Anyways, the light disappeared about 90 seconds later, slowly fading out. None of us know what it was. I'm a firefighter and we share a station with the police. I asked the chief the next day if he got any UFO reports and he acted like I was insane. Haven't really talked about it since. My wife refuses to say anything and occasionally my buddy and I will bring it up very briefly. I forgot some details and I don't know how to read it, so can't edit it in. My buddy was pulled over on the side of the road. He saw it driving. He said another car was pulled over. The object was very bright, the brightest thing in the sky. It would move in sudden bursts then hover. It flashed a couple times before it disappeared completely. This happened when I was 13. I was trying to sleep but the light fixture outside of my house kept flickering. So I go to inspect it. The light fixture isn't on and the light looks like it may be coming from the top of the house. I was pretty scared since I didn't know what was going on, but I decided to lay back down and try to sleep. A few minutes later I hear this beep squeal sound and I must have fallen asleep immediately after hearing it. I wake up and it feels like I've been drugged. I had surgery before this happened and it felt like anesthetics. I'm strapped to this table thing at my head, wrists and ankles. I feel a searing pain in my chest and then I woke up the next morning. I had a small cut on my left wrist that I didn't recognize, but I didn't think much of it. I've convinced myself it was a PTSD endured nightmare since I was awake during my surgery and I could feel most of it, but I'll never actually know what happened that night. It seriously scares the crap out of me to think about it sometimes. I remember it exactly as I did when I woke up the next morning. Not sure which is scarier, being awake during surgery or abducted by aliens. Either way, I feel like I should comfort you for experiencing at least one of those things for sure. A couple of years ago I was trying to get to sleep but I couldn't cause I kept seeing flashing lights outside. After a while I closed my eyes only to hear what sounded like whispers. I sprung awake and started looking around. I finally go back to bed, close my eyes for 5 seconds. Then a voice said you can wake up now. I woke up and it was 8 o'clock in the morning. Sounds like you went to sleep and had a dream that someone told you to wake up, so you did. 12-year-old me is looking out of my window in rural Connecticut. It's around 11 in the evening, warm summer night with the windows open. Crickets and lightning bugs, studying the outline of pine trees against the sky. A green orb, more powerful in color than a lightning bug. Not flashing, but a similar shade of green, appeared in the sky. It was far away and looked just like a big ball of blood to me. It was completely still when it appeared and hovered before it moved very quickly to another spot right near where it had been, froze in place for the second time, darted and hovered again, and then swooped away with the same crazy speed. I don't know what it was. Lightning bugs don't move that fast. It didn't blink or flash. It was completely solid, and it didn't vibrate eerily when I watched it stick in place. It was just there in the sky completely still for a few seconds each time. It zipped so fast and without making any sound at all. Just a weird thing. I think I was 11 or 12, but one night my sister and I were watching a movie when out of nowhere we heard lights flashing through all of our windows and the house had a small shake to it. Later that night when we were watching the news, they had reported a crap ton of UFO sightings in my area. The reason why it was on the news was because whatever it was flew over DC. I asked my brother-in-law, who is Secret Service for the White House, if he knew anything about it, and he pulled the whole "I can't tell you." It has stuck with me my whole life, just wondering what it was. I hate these threads. Not because of the stories, but because everyone is tripping over each other to try and disprove everything. I'm not saying that I believe everyone here is seeing aliens, but I didn't come here to listen to internet scientists pretending to be Agent Scully. The thread is what is your paranormal story, not explain why I am wrong because you saw a YouTube video one time about Chinese lanterns. Most sensible thing I've read so far. Really tired of the presumptuous and callous disregard for people's experiences. Maybe it was nothing, or their imagination, or any number of things, but no one asked for an armchair diagnosis or your home version of Mythbusters. Saw 3 UFOs. Once, as I had spent 8 years in the US military, I have seen virtually every type of aircraft we have in action, flying, and yet these UFOs flew in ways and speeds which would be impossible for our aircraft or pilots to survive. Now, as I never saw who what was piloting them, all I can say for sure is that I saw 3 unidentified flying objects, as I have had no idea what they actually were, so I can't and will not state that I have seen an extraterrestrial. Thanks, wasn't sure what you meant by the character 3. I was walking behind my apartment complex one evening in Florida. I happened to be looking up at the sky and I saw a shooting star, but then halfway to the ground it switched directions and did a little corkscrew maneuver. I thought to myself, okay, probably an insect instead of a meteor, except then it did it again, in the exact same way. It was just a small light, like a meteor, but it did the same maneuver exactly the same way within seconds. It was definitely eye-opening. I DK about aliens, but in high school I had a friend from a well-off family and we were spending the weekend at their vacation lake house. We had all finished beaching and eating outside on the deck that night and everyone had gone inside to play cards or watch TV. I stayed outside on the deck to look at the stars for a while. You didn't get to see so many stars this clearly back home. A few minutes go by and I see a flash of movement. I thought it was a shooting star and was bummed I missed it, so kept my eyes focused in the general area to see if another one would go by. Some more time passes, and suddenly one of the stars shoots off in a direction, stops, then rapidly moves off in another direction before coming to a halt and blending in with the surrounding stars again. What the frick? Stars, meteorites, satellites, nothing fricking moves like that. I was frozen. Eventually it moved again. Then a second star began moving about with the same speed. Then, even more bizarre, these two moving stars set a path that would have them crash, and sure enough they did collide, then bounced off into another direction again. Soon they were consistently running into each other and bouncing off again, shooting around in random directions, then meeting and separating once more. They were no larger, or brighter, or otherwise indistinguishable from any other star and were moving so quickly it took extreme focus to keep track of their location. I couldn't believe it. My mouth must have been hanging open. I wanted so badly to call out to the others in the room and have them see whatever it was I was watching, but I was afraid if I took my eyes off the sky that I wouldn't be able to find these stars again. I felt like I was in a spell and the slightest noise from me would cause these stars to go back to their stationary positions. I watched them bounce for what felt like a few minutes, probably no more than 5, and spent another few minutes in shock after they stopped moving, before heading back inside. I never told anyone there and haven't since due at the event sounding totally insane, and I don't have even the slightest explanation for what it might have been. TLDR. Watched some stars play bumper cars in the sky. Alien Wars. I was in Mexico visiting my grandparents at their ranch, which is in the middle of nowhere. Looks like Tatooine. Anyway, there is a balcony between the kitchen door and the living room entrance, and this balcony of course has no ceiling, so you can look up to the stars when traversing to the kitchen. We're all sitting in the kitchen and I decide to close the kitchen door because I feel eerie, as if something will be coming in, something unwanted. About 5 minutes after I close the door, something crashes against the outside of the door with high velocity. In less than 2 seconds, you can hear this thing climbing on the roof and taking long strides across the roof of the kitchen area. The reason you could make out the long strides is because the roof is made of metal sheets piled on top of one another. I'm pretty sure it was an alien. No doubt about it. What type of animal can't hit a door and be on top of the roof traversing the roof that fast? Very interesting how my fear of what some would say an irrational thought and thus unlikely event dictated my closing of the door not too long before this thing came crashing. When my aunt was little, she had an interesting experience. She was 8 and woke up the middle of the night to her door being open. This was strange because her parents always shut it when they tucked her in. She looked at the doorway, and then this white figure walked from the hallway into the doorway. It just looked at her. It wasn't a person. Just completely white with an odd-shaped head and black eyes. She was terrified and ducked under the covers. That was the end of it. 20 years later, my aunt is in a grocery store walking down the magazine book aisle with her daughter in the cart. She looks over and sees a book that has the exact same figure she saw when was a kid. She said that feeling of immediate terror completely overcame her and she left right away. She was so upset by it, she contacted the author and told him what happened. He actually replied and said he wrote that book with that specific image because multiple people over the course of a number of years had given him the exact description my aunt had. Creepy. My story gives me chills. Ugh, here it goes. When I was 15 I had an alien encounter. It was a day like any other. Typical chubby long-haired middle of the spectrum high school me, neither nerd nor jock, came home from school and did some homework. Shortly after I hopped on City of Heroes to get my MMO on with my internet buddies. We ran some missions and whatnot, and I realized it was getting late. We parted ways and I logged off. Completely normal day. I laid down in my bed thinking of French class the next morning and the QT3, 14s in that class, and drifted off to dream world. Flash forward. I woke up mentally. My eyes were closed. I could tell through my eyelids that it was abnormally bright in my room, like when a full moon is out. After a few seconds I realized I was coated in cold sweat. I was laying on my back with my blankets up to my chin. My brain was screaming at me to keep my eyes shut. It was as if my subconscious knew what was going on and didn't want my conscious mind to experience it. I had a feeling of terror unlike any terror you could imagine. Like I was about to die of suffocation terror. My eyes sprung open and fixated on my bedroom door. In the dim light I could see fingers pulling my door shut. Imagine if your fingers were twice as long and had an extra knuckle. The flesh of the fingers were the color of sand and looked as if they would feel like a low grit sandpaper. In those 2 seconds I watched those fingers. They closed my door with a soft click. The light began to dim in my room and I blacked out. I woke up the next morning in the same position I blacked out in. I pulled the blankets down and went to stand up. Only I couldn't. My legs wouldn't move. I called out for my mom. As I yelled out, the visions of last night crept back into my mind. Those sand-colored fingers. My mom burst into the room asking what was wrong. I couldn't walk. She helped me up but I still couldn't move my legs. I collapsed back onto my bed sobbing at being paralyzed. She carried me to her SUV and took me to the hospital. They did tests and x-rays and the like on me. Apparently during the night part of my spine had herniated through a small crescent moon shaped cutout on a disc in my back. Yeah, there is a small crescent moon shaped piece of bone missing from a disc in my lower back. At least now there is. The herniation came along with muscle spasms so tight that it caused my entire lower body to stop working. I got a bunch of epidural shots to relieve the spasms and pressure. After an hour or 2 I could walk again. Life continued on as usual. This was 10 years ago. Every now and then I still have muscle spasms and need shots for it. As of yet I haven't woken up to any more visitors. TLDR. Alien sampled my bone. Sandy fingers are scary. While I was visiting India with my cousins 10 years ago, we took a train to go from one end of the country to another. The train had rooms and bunk beds you could sleep in. Anyways, I wake up 4 in the morning and saw flashing lights outside. I looked out and saw that the lights formed a triangle shape. I woke my cousin up and he saw it too. It was dropping something every 2 minutes. I couldn't make out what it was dropping, but it had a yellow light attached to it, so I could see the yellow light drop from the ship and land into the farm's woods. It then started elevating and disappeared. I'm sure it was some sort of a human-made machine, but I'd still like to know what the heck it was. My cousin and I still talk about it occasionally. It was as if someone had painted a male blow-up sex doll black, filled it with helium, and set it free in the field near my house when I was 11 years old. I brought my mom out. She saw it too. We were actually talking about it a few weeks ago. Looked like it had a soldier's stance. Really straight, visibly, bald fists, standing feet, no parachute, no hat, just a streamlined black thing in the sky. It moved slowly and not really upwards, more backward than anything, as if it was stuck at that height and was moving away, getting smaller and smaller. We watched it sail off past the trees while frantically directing my father via telephone to look out the window of his apartment down the road. He didn't see anything. Super rural area. No military training or anything going on. It was over a horse farm owned by people who were always home, so I doubt pranksters were just doing dumb crap. It was weird, man. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.